9:04 on a Thursday morning. A courier van idled in the lot outside Briggs & Fenwick Architectural Salvage, the driver leaning against the door with a clipboard and a look that said he had better places to be. He handed the paperwork to the man who came out from the workshop and said only, "Hargreaves signed off on the whole load, said you could keep whatever you can't move." Then he unlatched the rear doors and walked away. 16 crates of architectural ironwork sat in the van. Drawer pulls, cabinet hinges, transom hooks, mortise locks, 3 sets of hand-forged strap hinges that ran nearly 2 feet across, all of it Victorian. All of it from the Dunmore Building demolition, the landmark on King Street that the Hargreave Group had quietly gutted over the winter while the Heritage Board was still reviewing the application. Fletcher Briggs pulled on his work gloves and climbed into the van. He lifted the corner of a moving blanket from the nearest crate and went still. Beneath it was a set of hand-cast bronze door pulls, each one 18 inches long, rope twist pattern, with a maker's mark he recognized without having to read it. He had drawn that pattern himself, 12 years ago, in a basement studio in Hamilton, working a commission for a restoration project he had believed in, more than he had believed in almost anything at the time. He turned the piece over. The foundry stamp was his own, from before the company had taken the pattern and the molds and the non-compete agreement and left him with a settlement that had taken 4 months and a very tired lawyer to collect. He set the piece down carefully. He looked at the other crates. He counted them. His daughter came to the van door. Emmeline was 8. She was in her rubber boots because she had been helping in the garden behind the shop since 7 that morning, and she had not changed when the van arrived. She looked at the crates and then at her father's face. "Dad, your hands stopped." "I'm all right, Button." He was not all right. He was deciding. He signed the courier's paperwork at 9:22. The van left the lot at 9:31. The ironwork stayed. That afternoon Fletcher spread the contents of the largest crate across the main workbench. He photographed each piece. He cross-referenced the maker's marks against the project file he still kept in a binder at the back of the office, the one with the hand-annotated drawings, and the correspondence from 2013, the year the commission had gone sideways. He did not call anyone. He worked until the light through the skylights went amber and Emmeline came in from the back to tell him her soup was getting cold. He sat down across from her at the kitchen table behind the shop and looked at her for a moment before picking up his spoon. "I'm going to be busy for a few weeks," he said. "There's someone I need to call tonight." Emmeline blew on her spoon. "Someone good? Someone I haven't talked to in a long time." Which means yes. Her name was Sylvie Uella, and she answered on the second ring despite it being nearly 10 o'clock. She had been a metalworking conservator at the ROM before she had moved back to Sudbury to run her own studio. She had also been the one who had first told Fletcher, in the parking lot of a restoration trade show in 2013, that what Hargreaves' in-house team was doing with his foundry patterns was not adaptation. It was appropriation. She had said it plainly, the way she said everything, with her coat half on and a coffee cup balanced on the roof of her car. "I need you to come down to Guelph," Fletcher said. "There's something in the shop you have to see." She was there by 7 the next morning, driving a salt-rusted Subaru with a cracked side mirror and a bumper sticker that had been there so long it was more adhesive than paper. She walked into the workshop, stopped at the bench, and stood without speaking for a full minute. He actually threw them out. His company did. Different people at the controls now. Sylvie picked up one of the rope twist pulls and held it under the bench lamp. She tilted it until the maker's mark caught the light. "These are the originals from the Dunmore Commission. Not castings, not reproductions. The originals you fabricated. Yes, and Hargreave just signed them over to you. The disposal slip says keep whatever you can't move." She set the piece down. She looked at him with the directness she had always had, the kind that made people either very comfortable or very uncomfortable, depending on whether they were hiding something. "What are you going to do with them?" "What I should have done 12 years ago. Restore them properly." She exhaled. It was not quite a laugh, but it was close. "What do you need?" "Your hands and your eye for the bronze work. 8 weeks, maybe 10. You've got them." That same morning, on the 14th floor of a glass tower in Toronto, a woman named Claudine Hargreaves sat at the head of a boardroom table reviewing a facilities disposal report. The Dunmore building contents had been cleared. The site was ready for the new development phase. She initialed the last page and closed the folder. She was 38 years old and had been CEO of the Hargreave Group for 14 months. She had come into the role from the company's acquisitions division, where she had spent a decade being very good at evaluating assets. She had not spent much time evaluating the things the company chose to discard. On her credenza, in a silver frame, was a photograph from 2011, her grandfather Warren in front of the Dunmore building on the day the company had acquired it, shaking hands with a young man in a work apron, whose face was half turned toward the camera. She had looked at that photograph 1,000 times. She had never asked who the man in the apron was. She turned off the desk lamp and went to her next meeting. On the second Thursday of the restoration, a courier arrived at Briggs & Fenwick with a manila envelope. Inside was a supplementary release form from Hargreave Legal. Standard language, 2 signatures required, a clause at the bottom of page 3 that released the receiving party from any claim arising from the commercial use of the received goods. Fletcher read the form twice. Then he read clause 9 again. He called the number on the letterhead. The assistant put him through to a woman who introduced herself as associate legal counsel, who explained that the form was a routine matter and that Ms. Hargreave would prefer to handle the final signature in person. Could he come to the Toronto office? He could not. He had a bronze casting on the bench that could not sit for more than 48 hours without developing surface oxidation that would take a week to correct. He said so. There was a pause. Then, Mrs. Hargreave will come to you tomorrow at 11. She arrived at 11:07 in a dark green company car, alone, a leather document case under her arm. She did not knock. The workshop door was open and she walked in as though she had been there before. Fletcher was at the bench. He did not look up immediately. He finished cleaning the face of a mortise lock with a bristle brush before he set it down and turned. Claudine placed the supplementary form on the bench beside the lock. My legal team needs the second signature. Same terms as before. She looked at the form rather than at him. If you need a moment to read it, I'll read it now. She had expected him to scan it. He read every line. She found herself watching his hands on the paper, the way he turned the pages without creasing them. She let her eyes move across the workshop while she waited. Tool rolls hung in order on the wall. A parts cabinet with hand-labeled drawers. A framed technical drawing pinned above the bench, annotated in pencil with a scale bar along the bottom edge. She looked at the drawing for a moment longer than she meant to. Charming workshop, she said. The word charming landed the way she had intended it to, which was not as a compliment. Very cottage industry. Fletcher signed the form in 2 places. He slid it back across the bench. She picked it up. As she turned to go, she let her gaze rest for a moment on the crate nearest the door, where 3 of the rope twist pulls lay wrapped in chamois cloth. I hope the salvage is worth the effort, Mr. Briggs. Those pieces were really just taking up space. Are you sure you don't want the Dunmore hardware back, Miss Hargreave? She stopped with her hand on the door frame. She did not turn around. I beg your pardon? Nothing. Drive safe. She walked to her car. She sat in it for 90 seconds before she started the engine. The line had landed somewhere it should not have been able to reach, and she did not know why. She had never mentioned which building the salvage had come from. The disposal slip had said Hargreave Group Miscellaneous Fixtures, King Street site. It had not named the Dunmore. How did he know? She drove back to Toronto with the radio on and turned it off after 4 minutes. Emmeline came into the workshop at 4 o'clock carrying 2 apples and a thermos of hot chocolate. She handed 1 apple to Sylvie, who accepted it with the gravity of someone being offered something important, and set the thermos on the corner of the bench away from the bronze work. She was wearing a really fancy coat, Emmeline observed. She was, Sylvie said. Did Dad make her nervous? Sylvie glanced across the bench. Fletcher had his back to them, measuring a hinge pin with a vernier caliper. I think he surprised her, which is almost the same thing. Emmeline considered this while eating her apple. Good, she said with the complete moral confidence of an 8-year-old. By the end of the second week, Claudine had her company's internal legal team pull every disposal contract signed in the last 3 years. She told them it was a routine audit. She read them herself on a Saturday in the apartment with a pencil and a pad of paper. By page 40, she had stopped making notes and started making a list of names. By page 60, she had a different, shorter list. 1 name appeared on the authorization line of 11 separate disposal contracts for heritage-grade assets over 36 months. Her director of asset management, Gordon Vale. The assets had been cleared at below-market valuations. The disposal contractors had varied. The timing had clustered around the quarters when the board's attention was on acquisition targets. She pulled Vale's personnel file. She read his performance reviews. She read the commendation her predecessor had written 18 months ago. She read the note her own assistant had flagged 3 weeks earlier and which she had set aside during a difficult week about an irregularity in a storage unit invoice from a facility in Mississauga. She called her personal solicitor. Not the company's, her own. On the Tuesday of the 3rd week, she drove back to Guelph without telling her office. She parked on the street and walked around to the workshop entrance. Through the open side door, she could see Sylvie at the secondary bench, working a piece of bronze with a fine wire brush. She could hear Fletcher somewhere in the back, a low, steady sound of metal on metal. She knocked on the doorframe. Sylvie looked up. She looked at Claudine for a moment with the flat, undisguised appraisal of someone who had been forming opinions about this woman for 2 weeks and was now simply confirming them. "He's in the finishing room," she said, straight back. The finishing room was small and smelled of linseed oil and warm metal. Fletcher was at a standing bench, fitting a hinge leaf to a test frame. He did not hear her over the sound of his own work. She stood in the doorway for a moment before speaking. "Mr. Briggs." He turned. He did not look surprised. He set the hinge down. "Miss Hargreave, I have some questions. All right. How did you know the salvage was from the Dunmore building?" He was quiet for a count of 3. "Because I built those pieces for the Dunmore Commission in 2013. I know my own work." The silence that followed was not hostile. It was the kind that happens when a person is recalibrating something they thought they understood. "You made them," she said. "Not a question. Your company commissioned them. Then your company licensed the patterns without my consent, produced a secondary line of hardware under the Hargreave Heritage label, and settled my legal claim with a non-compete that took 4 months to negotiate down to something I could sign." He said it the way a person states weather, not with anger, with the flatness of something that had been looked at from every angle and was simply a fact now. The original stayed in the Dunmore building because no one at Hargreave ever knew what they actually had. She put her hand on the doorframe. She looked at the test frame on his bench. The hinge fitted into it with the precision of something made to last 100 years. "Why didn't you tell me this at the start?" "Because you came in as a CEO with a legal form and a settled opinion of what I was. I could have told you anything. You would have heard a man making a claim in a salvage workshop." He picked up the hinge leaf again. "I needed to do the work whether you believed me or not." She left without asking anything else. She drove back toward Toronto and pulled off the highway at a rest stop north of Milton and sat in her car for 20 minutes. She thought about the photograph on her credenza, the young man in the work apron at the Dunmore acquisition. She thought about the heritage label her company still sold under. She thought about the name on 11 disposal contracts. She thought about the clause in her grandfather's original company charter that she had read once, in the first week after the board had confirmed her as CEO, and had not thought about again. The one about heritage commissions, the one that specified obligations to original creators. She had not known what it meant when she read it. She was beginning to now. On the Monday of the 4th week, she came back to the workshop with a cardboard box. She set it on the end of the bench opposite the bronze work and put her hand on the lid for a moment before opening it. Inside was a folder of documents, and beneath it, a USB drive in a small paper envelope with her grandfather's initials on it in ballpoint pen. Warren Hargreave, who had died of a heart attack 16 months ago, 4 days before she had accepted the position. Who had left her the company and a great deal she still did not entirely know how to carry. "I found this in his desk," she said. "In the locked drawer. I've been carrying it around for 6 weeks. She paused. "I'd like to open it with you here." Fletcher set down his work. He opened the folder. The first document was a memo her grandfather had written to himself in 2019, handwritten on company stationery, never sent to anyone. It detailed what Warren had discovered when he had quietly commissioned an independent review of the Heritage Label program. Gordon Vale had been sourcing the pattern library for the Heritage line, not through licensed acquisitions, but through what the memo called irregular appropriations, original creator agreements, misrepresented as full transfers, legal settlements structured to obscure ongoing use rights. Fletcher Briggs was named. 3 other craftspeople were named. Estimated improper gain to the company over 6 years, $2.1 million. Warren had written that he intended to dissolve the Heritage Label program, compensate the affected creators, and remove Vale from his position. He had died before any of it happened. The USB held the review documents, invoice records, pattern licensing comparisons, correspondence between Vale and two outside contractors that Warren had included without annotation, as though he had not yet decided what to do with them. The second document in the folder was a codicil to Warren's personal will, notarized, with 2 witness signatures. It named a Heritage Craft Trust, funded at $800,000, to be administered by the original commissioned creators of any work produced under the Hargreave Heritage label, contingent on the dissolution of that label and its proper settlement. Fletcher Briggs was listed first. Claudine sat down on the wooden stool at the end of the bench. She placed her hands flat on either side of the open folder. She did not speak for a moment. "I signed a piece of paper handing you your own work back for nothing," she said, "and I called it trash. Trash. You were told it was surplus. There's a difference. I should have known what we had. You'd been in the role 14 months. Your grandfather had been building this for 40 years and he didn't manage to clean it up before he died." Fletcher closed the folder carefully. "You couldn't have known what you weren't shown." She looked at him. "Why are you being reasonable about this? Because being otherwise doesn't fix anything." Emmeline appeared in the doorway with a tray. 3 mugs of tea, one with a label on the string that said peppermint, because Emmeline had asked Claudine on her second visit what kind of tea she liked and had remembered. She set the tray on the corner of the bench and slid the peppermint mug toward Claudine without fanfare. "Sylvie says the bronze on the big hinge set is ready to see," Emmeline announced. "But she said not to touch it yet." Claudine wrapped her hands around the mug. She did not drink. She held it until the warmth had moved from the ceramic into her palms. "Thank you," she said. Emmeline shrugged with the pragmatism of someone for whom making tea was simply what you did when a thing needed doing. She went back to the other room. That night, Claudine called her solicitor from the parking lot of a grocery store in Guelph rather than drive home to Toronto. "Emergency meeting. Tomorrow morning, early. Bring the Heritage label file and anything you have on pattern licensing from 2017 forward. Tell no one, specifically not Gordon Vale." By the end of the 5th week, the Dunmore hardware had been fully conserved. The rope twist pulls cleaned, stabilized, re-lacquered with a reversible conservation finish. The mortise locks refitted with new internals that matched the original tolerances. The strap hinges straightened and treated and mounted on a display frame that showed their full span. Fletcher had also, quietly and without telling Claudine, produced a complete technical report on each piece. Provenance, fabrication method, material analysis, condition before and after. The kind of documentation that made a thing undeniably what it claimed to be. He had not slept more than 5 hours a night for 3 weeks. His hands were steady. Sylvie did the final inspection on a Friday afternoon. She walked the display frame twice, crouching to look at the mortise lock housings from below, holding a loop to the surface of the bronze on the large hinge set. She stood up and looked at Fletcher. "You put a different patina on the strap hinges than the originals had. The originals had a chemical patina. I used a heat patina, more stable over time. The commission specifications called for chemical. The commission specifications were written in 2013. The chemistry is better now." Sylvie put the loop in her pocket. "They're better than they were." "Yes. Warren Hargreave would have known that. Warren Hargreave is why I didn't give up on them." She looked at him for a long moment. She did not say what she was thinking. She went to put the kettle on. Emmeline came in from school at 3:20. She dropped her backpack on the office chair, walked into the main room, saw the completed display frame, and stood in front of it with her hands clasped behind her back, the way she always stood when she was paying serious attention to something. "They look like they're from a castle," she said. "They're from a building on King Street in Toronto," Fletcher said. "That's what I said." On the Monday of the 6th week, Gordon Vale arrived at Claudine's office with a sealed folder and a look that suggested he had already decided how the meeting would go. He had brought a summary brief from the company's external litigation firm and a draft press release about a heritage conservation partnership. He had not been invited. He set the folder on her desk. "The Briggs situation. I've done some thinking. If he's completed conservation work on those pieces, the company may have a legitimate claim to the output under the original settlement terms. It's worth exploring." He folded his hands. We could recover the hardware, formalize the relationship, and frame it as a heritage initiative. Good optics. Claudine looked at the folder. She did not open it. She slid a different folder across the desk to him. It was not marked with anything. He opened it. The first page was a copy of an invoice from a Mississauga storage facility, June 2018. Items described as architectural surplus, billed to a holding number that resolved, through 4 intermediary steps, to a personal account in Vale's name. The second page was a pattern licensing comparison. The third was a page from her grandfather's memo, with Vale's name underlined in Warren's handwriting. By the fourth page, his hands had stopped being steady. "Security will see you out," Claudine said. "Human resources will be in touch by end of day." She pressed the intercom before he could speak. When he was gone, she sat for a moment with her hands flat on the desk. She thought about the disposal form she had signed on the Dunmore building, initialed without reading the asset list. The way she had initialed 100 things in the first months, when the grief of losing Warren and the weight of the company had made each day feel like wading through standing water. She thought about 11 contracts and $2.1 million, and a USB drive sitting in a locked desk drawer for 16 months, while a man with good optics and a litigation firm had continued to steer things. She thought about a workshop in Guelph where someone had quietly, over 6 weeks, made something broken into something better. She called her solicitor. Then she called Fletcher. "I need to come down on Wednesday," she said. "There are some things the board needs to hear. I'd like you there." There was a pause. "All right," he said. "I know it's a drive. It's not that far." On Wednesday morning, Claudine walked into the Hargreave Group boardroom with a file box, her solicitor, Fletcher Briggs, who was wearing a clean canvas work shirt and did not pretend it was a suit jacket. There were 7 board members. 2 of them had been on the board since Warren's time. 5 had joined in the 18 months since. She presented the evidence in 38 minutes. The pattern appropriations, the disposal contracts, the Mississauga invoices, the wire transfers, her grandfather's memo, and the independent review it had commissioned, the codicil and the Heritage Craft Trust it specified, the full scope of what Gordon Vale had managed across 6 years under a company structure that had never expected anyone to look that carefully at what was being discarded. She did not raise her voice. She did not use the word scandal. She used the word obligation. When she finished, the room held its silence for almost a full minute. One of the older board members asked about the Dunmore hardware. Specifically, where was it? "Fully conserved," Claudine said. "Better than original specification. Documentation is in the file." She nodded toward Fletcher. "By the man my grandfather commissioned to make it 12 years ago. The man whose work we sold under our own name for 6 years and then threw away." The Heritage Craft Trust was authorized by board resolution within the hour. The Heritage Label program was formally dissolved. Fletcher was named trust administrator. The settlement correction, the $2.1 million in improper licensing gains, redistributed to affected creators, with his portion confirmed in writing before the meeting ended. Vale's termination was ratified. The external litigation firm's retainer was not renewed. One of the 2 older board members walked the length of the table after the vote and shook Fletcher's hand without speaking, the way a person does when words would make the moment smaller. In the parking garage afterward, Claudine and Fletcher walked to their cars at the same pace, not quite together, not quite apart. The March light came in low through the concrete levels, the kind of late winter light that made everything look like it was deciding whether to stay or go. "You're not moving to Toronto," she said. "Emmeline's school is in Guelph. The workshop is in Guelph, right?" They stopped at the level where their cars diverged. She had her keys in her hand. She did not immediately move toward her car. "My grandfather believed in people before he believed in assets," she said. "I think I've been doing it the other way around. You're doing it the right way around now." She looked at him. The cold air off the parkade ramp moved the loose hair at her temple. "Thank you for the work, and for what you didn't say, in the weeks when you could have said it. You needed to find it yourself. I know. I'm still going to say thank you." She got in her car. He watched her pull up the ramp and out into the gray Toronto afternoon. Then he drove the hour and 20 minutes back to Guelph with the window cracked and the radio off, the way he had not driven in a long time. Emmeline was still up when he got home. She was at the kitchen table with a library book about bridges, and she looked up when he came in. "Did it go okay?" He sat down across from her and loosened his work shirt collar. The lamp on the table was the same one that had been in his father's kitchen in Elora when Fletcher was Emmeline's age. It went okay. Is the lady coming back? He looked at her for a moment. Maybe, Button. Maybe. April came to Guelph in fits, cold rain and sudden sun, and one late snow that dusted the workshop roof and was gone by noon. Claudine began driving down on Friday evenings. She had not named this habit, and neither had Fletcher, which suited them both. She had gone back to the boardroom with a new clarity that the older members had noticed and not commented on directly, the way Canadians often registered approval through the absence of objection. She had hired a new director of asset management from outside the company, a woman who had spent a decade in archival conservation and who asked in her first week a set of questions about the existing inventory that made Claudine feel she had found the right person. On Friday evenings, she sat in the workshop on the wooden stool with a cup of tea and watched Fletcher work. The VP8, she had started calling it privately, the next phase, a new commission from a heritage restoration project in Halifax that had come in through the trust. 3 sets of custom ironwork, a transom system, and a set of window stay hardware. Fletcher and Sylvie were 8 weeks in. Emmeline had taken to showing Claudine things, a book about grain elevators she had found at a school sale, a drawing she had made of the Dunmore strap hinges from the photograph Fletcher had taken for the condition report, a piece of scrap bronze the size of a playing card that Sylvie had given her, smooth on one face and rough on the other. Sylvie says it's a test piece, Emmeline explained one Friday, holding it up. She says every good thing starts as a test. That's a good way to think about it, Claudine said. She also said you were less annoying now than when you first came. That's high praise from Sylvie. I know, Emmeline said seriously. She doesn't say that about many people. One Saturday in May, they drove out to the Elora Gorge. Emmeline ran ahead on the path above the limestone walls, stopping every 30 feet to look down into the water. Fletcher and Claudine walked behind her, 2 paces apart, the way they had fallen into without discussing it. Your grandfather used to say something, Claudine said, about timing. I found it in one of his notebooks. He said good ironwork is all about the right moment. If you heat the metal too early or too late, you don't get a clean shape. He was right. He also wrote that a company was the same, that the problem with most organizations is they move when they feel like it rather than when the metal is ready. Fletcher looked at the path ahead of them, at Emmeline crouching at the gorge edge to look at something in the rock. What made you read his notebooks? I ran out of ways to feel like I knew him. They walked for a while without speaking. The sound of the river came up from below, even and unhurried. He wrote about you, she said, in one of them, not by name, but by the commission. The Dunmore hardware. He wrote that it was the best ironwork he had ever purchased and that the company had treated the man who made it very badly and that he intended to do something about it. She paused. He wrote it in 2020. He died in 2023. I don't know why he waited. People wait, Fletcher said, until they don't. Emmeline turned and waved at them from a flat rock near the path's edge. Her boots were muddy. She was completely satisfied with this. That evening, before Claudine drove back to Toronto, Fletcher went to the workshop and came back with a small cloth bag. He handed it to her at the car. Inside was a single hardware piece, a small hand-forged hook in bronze, the kind used for a transom stay. The surface had a warm heat patina, amber shading into brown. On the shank, finely engraved, were 2 things: the maker's mark she had seen on the disposal paperwork for the first time 4 months ago, and a date. The date was the day the Dunmore salvage had arrived in his lot. What is this? She asked. The first piece I made after the van left. I make one at the start of every new chapter. It's a habit. He closed her hand around it. You should have one. You're part of why this chapter happened. She did not say thank you. She held the piece in her closed hand, looked at him once and got in her car. He watched her pull out of the lot and onto the road south. The next Friday she came back, and the Friday after that. In September, the Halifax commission was complete. The ironwork shipped north in padded crates, documented and insured, accompanied by the full technical report and a letter from the Heritage Craft Trust that explained the provenance of every piece. The project architect called Fletcher the week it arrived and said quietly that he had never received hardware that came with that kind of paper trail and that it had changed how he was thinking about the rest of the restoration. Fletcher told Emmeline about the call at dinner. She nodded as though this were the expected outcome. Sylvie said the Halifax pieces were the best work you'd ever done, she said. Sylvie said that? She said it to me, not to you. Emmeline considered her soup. She said you'd get a big head. She's probably right. I told her you wouldn't. Emmeline looked up. Was I wrong? Eat your soup, Button. She smiled and ate her soup. On a Saturday in late October, Claudine came to Guelph and did not go to the workshop. She came to the house instead, because Emmeline had asked her 3 weeks earlier if she knew how to make tourtière. And Claudine had said her grandmother's version, and Emmeline had said with complete seriousness that she would like to learn. They spent the morning in the kitchen. Emmeline measured everything with the concentration of a young engineer. Claudine found that she remembered her grandmother's hands more clearly than she had expected to. Fletcher made coffee and stayed mostly out of the way, which was its own kind of presence. In the afternoon, they walked the Speed River Trail, Emmeline between them for the first stretch, and then ahead, as she always eventually was. The trees were past peak color, the red and gold thinning to brown, but the light through them was still doing something worth looking at. "Are you going to stay in Toronto?" Fletcher asked. "I have a company to run in Toronto." "That's not what I asked." He had said it the way she had once said something to him, in the finishing room, and she recognized the shape of the question. She was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to keep coming to Guelph," she said. "For as long as I'm welcome, that's going to be a while." She did not answer. She watched Emmeline stop ahead on the path and hold out her hand to catch a falling leaf. Miss, try again and catch the third one. Hold it up to show them without turning around, just holding it up to the gray sky. The river ran alongside them, even and patient, the way rivers do in October, the way some things do when they have found their pace and do not need to announce it. There are pieces of ironwork now in a building in Halifax that most people walk past without looking at. A set of strap hinges on a restored door, a transom hook above a century-old window frame. If you hold a loop to the shank of the transom hook, you can read the maker's mark and the date. If you know what you're looking at, you know who made them and what it took. Most people don't look that closely. The ones who do tend to stop for a moment, the way a person stops when they recognize something they didn't know they were looking for. Then they go on with their day, carrying the small weight of having seen something real.